right, I think I'm live. Let me go ahead and double check here. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Make sure my sound is off. Perfect. Hi, everybody. All right, I'm just going to wait a second, see if anybody jumps on, make sure everything's working good before we start. Awesome, awesome. Perfect. I just have my iPad set up here in front of me so I can see everybody's comments. Oh, I see a couple people on. Hi, guys. Let me know if you can see me and hear me all right before we start. Let's see. There we go. All right, how you guys doing? Make sure this is all good. Other cameras ready to go down here. All right. Oh, I see a couple likes. Hi, everybody. All right. Can you guys see me? Should be all right. Oh, we got 3 people on. Perfect. Make sure to comment down below where you're watching from. It's always fun to see where everybody is around the world. Oh, I see Carol's on. Hi, Carol. All right. Make sure my Isomalt is heating up here nice and good. All right. Fantastic. Let's see. All good. We got a couple more people on now. How are you guys doing? Hi, Barbara. All right. So we'll go ahead and get started here. I'd just like to wait a couple minutes for anybody to jump on. We are going to be making our pulled Isomalt roses and our Mother's Day frame today. I'm super excited about this one. Roses is one of those really classic techniques that you can use all the time, so I'm really excited to show you guys my technique for making roses. Fantastic. All right, let's check on my Isomalt here. Perfect. All right, and since Mother's Day is in just a few days, I thought that I would show you guys a really nice frame that you can do, kind of like a fun, sort of simple color scheme that is going to make your design really pop. So I'll show you here now. I have my pretty Isomalt frame, so this is all Isomalt. It has that glass surface over the edible design on the inside. We're going to put the little kind of like cake stand in the back of it so it stands up. And then we're also going to be making our roses. I'll hold that up as well. It'll be easier to see once the camera's down, but I have my long-stemmed rose here. So very Beauty and the Beast kind of style rose. We'll be making that as well. Is anybody going to follow along today, or are you going to watch and then do it at another time? Let me know. All right, awesome. Hi, Mark. You didn't miss anything. We're just about to start. Barbara's excited. I'm excited too. Hi, Angela. Hi, Bev. The color we're starting with today is black, so if you are going to be following along, we're going to start with the black, and then the red is going to be right after that. Awesome, awesome. All right. Hi, Susan from Las Vegas. Perfect. All right, so we can go ahead and get started. It looks like everything is working good. All right, great. Okay, so we are going to be making, like I said, our Mother's Day theme. Here in the U.S. it's Mother's Day in just a few days, but these, of course, can be used for lots of different themes. Like I said, very Beauty and the Beast. It's great for birthdays. It's great for anniversaries. You can change the colors of the roses and, you know, kind of have lots of different interpretations of it. So that's what I'm going to show you today, but pulled roses is one of those really classic sugar techniques, and I'm going to show you my way of doing them today, as well as the long stems and the frame, of course, with the edible design inside of it, and the painting and everything like that. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'll be looking here on my iPad so I can see them, and Mom is here as well, so she'll be calling them out. All right. Awesome, awesome. Hi, Sandy. How you doing? Perfect. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. First off, of course, what we're using today is Simi Isomalt. So my Simi Isomalt tiles are all pre-cooked and ready to use. All you have to do is melt them down. So 30 seconds in the microwave, and then 15-second intervals until it's a liquid. So you just want to go nice and slow and bring the Isomalt to a boil. Because these are already in the hard candy form, we don't have to worry about temperatures or recipes or anything. If you have the Isomalt crystals, the raw Isomalt, it does have to be tempered. That's the process this has already gone through. So whether you tempered it yourself or you used my pre-cooked ready-to-use Isomalt. Once it's in this form, you don't have to worry about anything. You just melt it down until it's a liquid, kind of like candy melt, so it makes it super easy. But I'm not going to be cooking it in class today just because it's a long process, but if you're interested in that, my recipe for the raw Isomalt crystals is on my website of what we use. But starting with the pre-cooked Isomalt just takes all the guesswork out of it. It's going to be super crystal clear, especially for a project like this where we're going to be doing the frame. We really want it to look like glass, and we don't want to have a ton of bubbles or anything mixed in. So with our Isomalt, we don't add in any air, and it's going to be really crystal clear to start. So that's what we're using today. To make all of our pieces, we're using different colors of Isomalt. I'll talk about coloring and having pre-colored and things like that. Remember, you can also flavor the Isomalt with oil-based flavorings, just like the Lorraine candy oils work great. Just a few drops, and you can get any flavor you want for any of these decorations. Do be careful because Isomalt is hot, right? It's about 300 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 150 degrees Celsius. So make sure that you wear your gloves. Don't follow my bad example of not wearing gloves. I've just been doing this for about 14 years, and my hands have no heat sensitivity left, so it's easier for me to demonstrate in more detail. But I do highly recommend wearing the gloves. Usually a cotton glove with a nitrile or latex glove over top of that is going to be the best bet to protect your hands while you're working. I know some people are intimidated by Isomalt because it is hot, but if you bake cakes and you work with ovens and stoves every single day, it's the same rules apply. Just be careful, pay attention to what you're doing, wear your gloves, everything will be good. And we are going to be doing hands-on work with this project today with actually pulling the Isomalt and pulling each petal by hand. So just make sure that you're wearing your gloves for that part because it is going to be a little bit cooler, but it can still be quite uncomfortable depending on your heat sensitivity. So I do recommend wearing the gloves the whole time, but once you get into pulling, you'll kind of get a feel for what works best for you. Okay, so I'm going to switch my camera down here so you guys can see my work table, and I'll show you the pieces again a little bit more up close. So this is the frame that we're going to be making. This is all Isomalt. You can see that beautiful crystal clear glass over the icing image design in there. And then we're going to put a little backing here too so it can actually stand up if you wanted it to. And then here's the rose. It might be a little easier to see now that it's flat. So we're going to be making this is all Isomalt. It's all pulled by hand. We don't use cutters or templates or anything, as well as the calyx and the stem along the back. So again, very Beauty and the Beast inspired, very kind of pretty. It's going to be perfect for Mother's Day, but it also kind of has that really nice just rose look to it that you can use for anniversaries and birthdays and lots of different things. Or of course you can leave out the stem and just do the roses and clusters, you know, around a cake or for any sort of decorations on cupcakes and things. Okay, I'm going to put these back here so I don't break them. All right. Okay, so again, we just started with our clear Isomalt tiles, melt it in the microwave for 30 seconds, and then 15-second intervals until it's a liquid. So once that is done, it's going to come to a boil. The boil is important for poured pieces especially because you want to get all the air out. So one of my tips for getting crystal clear pieces is going to be bringing it to a nice boil. Of course, you don't want to burn the Isomalt. You still want to go in little increments, but you want to make sure that you are getting it to a nice rolling boil, and that is just going to make sure that all of the air is boiled out because hot air rises. So if there were any little air bubbles mixed in from stirring in the color or just from melting down and having little air pockets, that will just bring out all of the bubbles and any air mixed in. Okay. How we doing? Hi, Elma. Hi, Mark. Hi, Patricia. Hi, Jackie. Oh my gosh, everybody's here. So I just popped my Isomalt back in the microwave for about 30 seconds because I had preheated it, but it got back to a little bit of a too thick texture to work with. Now I'm going to be using pre-colored Isomalts because that's what came in the accessory kit for this project. If you did get the accessory kit with the mold and the Isomalt colors that's available on my website, and the frame design is also in there, you just use them as is. But if you want to color it, I'll tell you what colors I used along the way. For this nice opaque dark black, I used a petal dust, so I used Turkish black from thesugarart.com. They're elite colors. Their petal dusts are perfect for getting solid finishes. Once we go into the clear colors later, I'll talk more about those, but powdered colors give you a more opaque finish. The one kind of color you never ever want to mix into airbrush or into Isomalt is gel color, because gel color will break down the Isomalt and not allow it to dry. So I either will use a powder, or later you'll see with the red I use an airbrush color, a water or alcohol based. Okay. So what we'll go ahead and do is we'll pour our frame mold first to allow it to cool, because we're going to have to pour this in layers for the different color of the frame and then the center. So what I'm going to do is, you can see this is one of our Simi frame molds. Again, this was in the accessory kit, or we have lots of different ones, but you can use any kind of silicone frame mold. Will work really good with Isomalt as long as it's high heat and food safe. So this is one of our really pretty ones that I love. I use this all the time, and I'm going to pour the border on the outside first because we don't want the black in the middle, right? We just want the outside. Alright, so I'm just going to carefully and slowly pour all the way around, and I'm just making sure the cavity is mostly filled. I'm not worrying about it spreading into all the crevices yet, because I can do that easier by hand. Okay, so see how I just filled it in, and then I'll take my silicone tool, or you can use a skewer or toothpick, and just make sure that it's pushed into all the details and pockets around the edge. Since this is a pretty detailed mold, we want to make sure that everything is nice and spread. You can also use your tool or toothpick to scoop and drip some in if you didn't quite get enough in some spot, or of course just pour more over it if needed. Now, even if I was doing this all one color, like let's say I wanted this whole thing to be clear and I want the center to be clear as well, I still like to pour it in layers, because if you pour this whole thing now, you see how the center is raised compared to the design on the outside. So when you pour that, it's not going to pour as evenly. You're going to have like a bubbled back on it. And when you take it out, it's going to be inset and it's not going to be flat across the top, which is not going to be quite as realistic. So even if I was doing the frame the same color as the center, I still pour them separately. So I wait for the outside to cool, I take it out, and then I'll show you how we're going to fill in the center later. Okay, so basically we're just going to pour that in, and then we're going to let this cool for about probably 15 to 20 minutes at room temperature, depending on the temperature of your room will affect it, but you just want to make sure you don't put it in the fridge or the freezer. You just want it to be nice and room temperature, and we'll put that off to the side to cool. All right, perfect. So you guys have any questions? Let me check. Let's see, Jackie asked, is that similar to the one we used for the Maryland Bubblegum Girl? Yes, this one is smaller, so the Bubblegum Girl frame was a little bit bigger and had smoother, more like sleek edges. This one has a little bit more like a gilded detail to it, but the technique is going to be similar. So if you, she's talking about my online class that I have available on my website for the Blown Bubble Girl, where Marilyn Monroe is blowing a bubblegum bubble. That's going to be a similar technique. So if you did that class, for the frame part, this is going to be a little bit similar to just the pouring part of it. The painting and everything is all completely different, and we did that one on a cookie. So, so yeah, that is going to be our frame. That's our first layer that we're pouring, and then we will let that cool while we do our other elements. All right. So I'm going to pop my red Isomalt into the microwave now and just get that all nice and melted. We are going to be pulling this Isomalt, so it's not vital that it's all the air bubbles are out, because we're actually going to be mixing in more air bubbles. So it's okay if the air bubbles are still inside of it, because we're just going to be mixing in more air when we pull. So it doesn't have to come to a boil necessarily, but it can. You just want to get it nice and hot and pourable to pour out onto our silicone mat. So if you're new to pulling, what we are going to do is actually pull onto this silicone mat. This is a silicone baking mat, so it's a little bit more flexible. It has a different texture than the Silpat mats. It doesn't have that wovenness. So I like to use these just because it's going to be a little bit easier to release and everything when we're working with it. So I'm going to go ahead and pull on that. But I am going to leave the Silpat mat underneath, and the reason for that is we want to make sure that we have a double layer, and that's going to keep the heat from insulating too much, especially because I'm working on a metal table. But I find on most counters that aren't stone, that stays really cool, they're going to insulate a lot of heat, and it can actually make the pores of the silicone mat open up too much, because silicone has pores just like your skin, and if it opens up too much from getting too hot, the Isomalt can actually get stuck down in them and not want to release. Now, if that does happen, it's not a big deal, because it is going to release with some cool water. So I just take off my excess Isomalt, and then I will go ahead and still use that, but then that little spot that's stuck, run it under some cool water. It literally jumps off. It generally does not stick in the same spot twice. It's really more so about the heat. So to prevent that from happening, you'll see me moving the mat around a little bit to help keep it in a cool spot, but also having that double mat I find really helps. Now, if you're on a stone countertop, you may even want to have another mat under here though, anyway, because sometimes it can do the opposite. It can be too cool and it can cool down too fast. So with working with it, you'll kind of find what works best for you. This is what works best for me, is just having that double layer. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and pour out my Isomalt once it stops boiling and bubbling. So you don't ever want to pour the Isomalt when it's boiling, even for pulling, because you don't want to pour any too hot of Isomalt out, but you also want to make sure all those bubbles settle if you're doing something like casting. So I'm just going to let that sit for a minute, not on the mat, because again, I want to keep this cool. So if I set the bowl down on it, it's going to have already a warm spot before I start. So I'll just let that cool for a second, and then we will pour it out and start the pulling process. So again, for this really pretty red color, I used airbrush color. So this is going to be a water or alcohol-based color rather than a gel. That is going to distribute really well. You don't need very much, usually just a few drops, and it's going to give you a super duper bright red. Let's see, Angela's asking, could I use the sugar flare dust that we get in the UK to color the Isomalt? It may take a little bit of experimenting. I haven't used the sugar flare dust, so I can't say for each individual brand because there's so many. What I would say is just test a little bit and see how the finish comes out. Make sure it dries properly. As long as it's a dust, generally it will be fine. The only thing you want to look out for with dust is that they're really ground really fine, so you don't get any clumps. But luster dust work great, petal dust work great. Of course, the luster will give you more of an iridescent finish, where petal dust is more of a flat finish. Which you'll be able to see more when the frame comes out as well. Alright, so see how my Isomalt's not boiling anymore. It is nice and smooth, but it's still quite liquid, so I'll be able to pour it out and start pulling. Okay, so pulling is basically just the process of cooling this down and turning it into a clay. You can do as much as you want at once. So, you know, if you've done this a lot before, you can pour out more. If you've only done it a couple times, or you're new to it, you can just do a little bit at a time and keep pulling more as needed. But what we're doing is just cooling it down, so I'm folding over my mat from different directions. Again, I recommend the gloves with this because you are touching the back of the mat, which is quite hot, and soon we'll be touching the Isomalt itself once it cools a little bit. Now when I'm folding, I'm not worrying about any specific direction. I can go vertically, horizontally, diagonally, but I do want to make sure that I'm folding it in half and I'm lining up the edges of the puddle. So this edge is going to roughly line up with that edge when I fold. I'm not stopping before it or going way past it. I'm just folding over in half and then peeling back and then going from the opposite side to keep it as consistent as possible. Like I said, to keep the table from getting too hot, I am going to go ahead and just move it over every few folds to a new spot. And see how I'm going nice and slow at first. It is very hot, so you don't want to splatter it anywhere while it's still so liquid. Alright, so just slowly folding, and the goal to this is to get it all to come together into a ball and to stop sticking to the mat. So it's kind of like dough. It will react that way once it's cool enough. So I just want to keep folding it, moving it over every few folds. I can feel it getting a lot thicker, so you see the edges are starting to pull away and the center is starting to hold its shape. That's good. I'm still folding edge to edge, so I'm lining up one edge with the other to make sure it all comes together in the middle. Once it starts thickening, you can see it is pulling away a little bit easier from the mat, so I am going to start pulling quicker. You see how when I went quicker, it actually released from the mat easier than it was. So once it is in a thicker form that's not feeling like it's going to splatter anywhere, you can go a little faster, and that will help it to release from the mat easier. There we go. And now it's still quite sticky, so if I were to pick this up, I can see now that it's still sticking to the bottom of the mat. So I am going to go ahead and just keep folding until it looks like it's holding its shape a little bit better and it's not quite so sticky. And then I'll try picking it up with my ideally gloved hands. Mom, would you mind making it a tiny bit cooler in here?
Yeah.
Thank you. I have my heat lamp on over here, so it's quite hot in my studio. Alright. So I can see now that it's really easily releasing from the mat. I almost don't even have to do anything and it just comes right off. So I'm going to try picking it up. If this was still sticking to the mat or sticking a lot to your gloves, you can keep folding it until it's ready. But once it's ready, you should be able to pick it up with no problem. Now I can see that it's still quite pliable. It's just blobbing back down whenever I try and put shape into it or pick it up. So I can see that it's going to be too hot and really frustrating to work with right now. So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and cool it down further, but this time we can actually pull it. So because it's cool enough to be able to be handled now, I'm just going to pick it up, stretch it, and fold it. You just want to fold it in half. You don't have to do anything crazy. What this is doing is just adding in more cool air, the same as what we were doing on the mat, except now we can use our hands. Okay, I like to roll it every few folds just to help it all bond together and to help cool it off further. Your body heat is actually cooling it down, which is kind of crazy with Isomalt because it's so hot. Okay, and I'm also going to see that it's going to start getting these beautiful streaks and striations of air, and it's going to get that satin finish, which is really going to help us with these roses. It's going to look so pretty. The more that you pull it, the more satin-like it will be, so that's kind of up to you. And it'll also harden the texture the more and more air you fold into it. So if you want to work with something a little bit firmer, you can keep pulling it. If you like working with something more pliable, you can under-pull it a little. Isomalt's a very hands-on medium, so you'll kind of figure it out as you go what's going to work best for you. It's very easy to tell once you've done it a few times. Okay, so I can see now that it's holding its shape a lot better. It's still quite pliable, so I'm going to be able to easily sculpt it, but it's not just immediately turning into a blob and melting back down when I set it down. So once I'm happy with the texture, I'm just going to fold it and kind of roll it and smush it into a ball, just something very simple, and put it underneath my heat lamp. So the heat lamp that I'm using, I've had it preheating for a couple minutes just so that the mat warmed up, and I use a 250 watt bulb, so that's going to be very warm, and it's going to keep the Isomalt nice and pliable as long as I leave it there, so I can just pull a whole bunch and then cut pieces off as needed. So that's going to be really helpful. You can get the bulb usually at the hardware store, or here in the States you can get them at Walmart. A lot of like animal supply stores have them as well. It's just a hood for like a chicken or a reptile brooding light. So usually it's under 15 bucks for both of them at Walmart. Very inexpensive, and you can just clip it to your overhead cabinet if you're working on your countertops. I just open the door and clip it to the side, that way you can raise and lower it if needed. But if you want more in-depth information and seeing what height I put it to and everything, I have a whole YouTube video on it. So on my YouTube channel, I have a whole YouTube video on building the stand I use for it and everything like that. So you can check that out. My YouTube channel is just under my name, or you can go to, where is it? My website down there has all of the links. Okay. So now that our red is pulled, we can go ahead and start with our roses. I'm going to grab my other rose just to have it next to me so I can kind of reference it as I work. Okay. Let's put it over here so I don't hopefully bump it too much. Alright. So we are going to start with the center, of course, of the rose, and then we'll build out our petals from there. I don't follow a specific template or like pattern or anything like that. I just do it by eye. I've done a couple of these so I kind of know where I'm going. I find that it's easier to just keep adding petals and balancing it out. But if you have a rose technique that you really like, you can definitely apply it to this. So if you make modeling chocolate roses or fondant roses, and you really like a certain, like the traditional 1, 3, 5 petal sort of pattern, you're welcome to use that with this. The cool thing about Isomalt is it's very adaptable. You can apply a lot of techniques you already know onto it. But I'm just going to show you how I do my roses. Okay. So I will go ahead and grab my Isomalt. Now with pulled Isomalt, it's important to know the more you touch it, the more you knead it, the more you fold it, the harder it's going to get. You don't have to immediately take your Isomalt from the lamp and start stretching and folding it like I just did by default. I feel it, so I usually fold it maybe once or just kind of poke at it a little bit and feel the texture. If it feels okay, maybe your room's a little bit cooler and it feels alright, I just cut a piece off immediately and start working with it. But if I were to pick it up and it felt too pliable, that's when I would stretch and fold it a couple times to get it back into my ideal texture. But if you take it out from the lamp and immediately start stretching and folding it every time, it's going to get way too hard very quickly. You can reanimate it on your mat, so you can actually fold it up in your mat if it's still warm but too hard to work with. You can put it in the microwave for about 5-second intervals to reanimate it. Just make sure you're careful because the microwave doesn't heat totally evenly, so you want to fold it on the mat just like I did before a little bit before you actually pick it up, and then you can get it back into the working texture. But I'm just going to go by feel as I go with this. Alright, so I can feel it got a little bit melty from under my lamp. So I just folded it a couple times, and you always cut from the smooth side. So see how I just rolled it to get a nice smooth spot? You don't want to cut from the side that went together where the wrinkles are. And I'm just going to cut a little bit off. Of course, the more you cut off, the bigger it's going to be. It's already kind of in this like football shape, so I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to keep one of the points going and create a teardrop. So I'm flattening out the base on one side and then skinnying out the top, making it nice and thin. You don't want this to be too chunky because it's supposed to kind of have that twirling sort of look. Okay, so I just made like an elongated Hershey kiss. Set it down so it sits flat. It doesn't have to sit flat, but it really does help with making sure that everything is going to stay nice and upright. Okay, and then I like to use my fan just to rush the cooling process. It's okay if you don't have a fan. You can just kind of move away from the lamp if you're in a cooler room, or you can just wait for it to cool at room temperature, but the fan does speed it up a little bit, just so I can go a little faster for demonstration purposes and impatience purposes. Okay, so that's going to be our center to build on. The cool part about Isomalt is you don't need a glue or anything to stick everything together. You may need a little bit of heat, but if everything's still kind of warm as you're putting each petal on, it's going to stick by itself. Okay, so it doesn't need to be ice cold. Like I said, if it is a little warm, it actually will stick better. Warm to warm always sticks better than warm to cool. Okay, so I just started with my little cone. Of course, to make the bigger roses or smaller roses, you would start with a bigger or smaller cone. Okay, and then we're going to make our petals. So with the petals, what you're going to do is you're going to do this under the lamp. I'm not going to do it under the lamp since my camera is set up outside the lamp so I don't melt it, but I'm going to show you here. But I do recommend, if you feel like your Isomalt is hardening and cooling really quick, and just to give yourself more time to work with the petal, it's going to be easiest to do this under the lamp, okay? So what we're going to do is we are going to work right off of the massive Isomalt that we have. So this is, again, it's warm in here, so I am just stretching and folding this once or twice before I start. Okay, from the smooth spot, instead of cutting a piece off this time, there's a little air pocket, so I'm going to fold it over again. Instead of cutting a piece off, I'm just going to pinch. So I'm going to pinch upwards and create like a little tongue sticking out. Okay, see that up here? And I'm pulling up and over to create a thin top edge, and then pulling up from the center. Let me angle it a little so you can kind of see what I'm doing. And I want to make an oval shape, so I'm pulling it out pretty wide. Okay, wide enough to wrap around the whole thing. And then I will cut that off. The excess now goes back under the lamp. And you see how I have a nice flat petal here. Okay. Now, if this got a little too hard from being really cool in your room or your hands touching it so much, you can very, very, very lightly go over the whole thing with the blowtorch. You may have to do the other side as well if it is a little bit on the cooler side. You want to make sure that you always do both, unless it's a really thin petal, then it will be able to get through. But the torch only really heats the surface, so you want to make sure both sides are evenly melted. Okay, after about 5 or 10 seconds, you can pick it back up. And then important with roses is that all the petals, at least for the center ones as you go, are going to be level across the top. So I'm lining this up level with, here, I'll go this way, with the top of my center. So I'm sticking it at the bottom, okay, not at the whole side. I'm not wrapping it flat around. I'm going to wrap one side around the piece and then wrap the other side around, kind of like a robe. It's okay if they don't touch. Okay. So I just wrap those around, and then to give it a little bit more of a lifelike sort of look, what I like to do is flare the edges out. Now, if you're working quick or you're working under the lamp, like I said, this will still be nice and pliable. Because I'm going a little bit slower and I'm not working under the lamp, I just need to lightly torch the edges of the petal. Let it cool for 5 or 10 seconds for the heat to sink in. And then you can use a toothpick or a tool to wrap it around, but I just use my finger. And I'm just pulling it down. You see that? So that it goes more flat rather than straight up. And I do that all the way down. You can heat more as needed. Okay, I'll do a little bit more to this side. Let's see, Michelle's asking, do you need any kind of non-stick on your scissors? No, because the scissors are cool, so it's automatically just going to release from it because it's not actually liquid Isomalt, it's pulled, so it's a little bit easier to release. Now, if your scissors are hot, they are not going to release, they're going to stick, so make sure you're not leaving them underneath the lamp in between using them. They're outside from the lamp. All right. So see how I just flared the edges out here? So that the edge is actually pointing more horizontally. So see how it's pointing that way rather than pointing straight up from the rose. I think that that's really important because it just adds that little flared edge. They tend to get really thin, delicate edges to them. With roses, that's kind of what shows how delicate roses are. So that's really a good way to make your petals even look thinner than they are, even if they're a little on the thick side, by just flaring them out flat rather than sticking straight up into the air. It's really going to help. Another identifier with roses that I feel like is really important to nail if you want to get that really pretty rose look is depth. So you want to look down into the petals and make sure you see space all around it. That's why when I stick it onto the bottom. I don't stick the entire petal up to the side of the flower. I just attach the bottom. It may stick a little bit, maybe to halfway up, but I try not to let my petals stick any higher up than halfway, so you can really see down into them, because real roses are only attached at the base, right? They're not stuck to the entire flower all up the side. They're only attached to the base, so you want to try and mimic that as much as possible, and by doing that, it gives you the really pretty depth. Okay, so that was our first petal. That one was more oval, like I said. The next ones are going to be more rounded, so I'm going to find another smooth spot. I'm going to pinch, and I do a combination of pinching forward and pulling towards me, and then pulling wider to make sure it doesn't get too skinny. And I'm holding it mostly from the center, because the warmest spot is in the center, which means it's the most pliable there, and it's going to want to get really thin in that spot. In order to keep it from getting too thin and delicate and breakable in the middle, that's why you always hold it by the center mostly, because your hands are cooling it and stopping it from expanding there as much. Okay, I'm going to lightly torch again, just because I'm not working under the lamp and I'm going a little bit slower than normal, to make sure it's going to stay nice and flexible for me. So your torch is your friend. Don't be afraid of the torch. It's a really useful tool. And now the next petal is going to go right at the gap of the first one, so where the two flowers, or the two sides of the petal met. Again, I'm making sure that the petals are going pretty straight across the top. They're not going up and out, otherwise you'll get like a cabbage look, which is fine if you're going for cabbage, but we want nice pretty roses. Okay, so now again, you can see that that next petal I put up, the edge is kind of pointing more straight up. So I'm going to flare the edge down. A toothpick helps with this a lot of the time, because you can kind of curl it around it, but I just like to use my finger to curl it down and over. And you see how now the petal is pointing more flat outwards rather than straight up in the air. Now I know it's a little bit hard to see the rose right now because it is all one color, and it's also transparent, so sometimes the details can get lost on each other a little bit, but we're going to paint this slightly later to just bring everything out. So it's okay if it looks a little bit muddled at the moment. It can look really pretty having that glassy look, but I really like to have a striking look to my pieces, so I'm going to go back and paint them. And we're just going to repeat this process for as many petals as you want to go on. So I'm going to make one a little bit quicker now so you can see more real time of how I do this. Okay, this, because I just went so quick in pulling that out, is still really pliable. So I'm going to stick it at the bottom, then bend my way up. That way I have more control. And then flare the edge out and down. So I overlapped the last petal I put on slightly. Okay. If your petals, and you're working quick like this, if they're really warm and are like falling down or anything, just zap it with the air for a few seconds and that'll solidify it in place. You see how I didn't have to do any reheating at that point. It all depends on how fast you're working, your room environment, and how much you're touching it as well. Because remember, the more you touch it and the more your hands are on it, the harder it's getting. So I'm going to do about 3 for this next layer because that's a nice balance. Okay, so pulling out, pulling towards me, pulling out, pulling towards me. Focusing my fingers more on the center so the center doesn't get too thin and clear and delicate. Okay. And then I just keep filling in gaps wherever it looks unbalanced. Okay, the first petals I don't worry as much about shape or anything like that. But once we go into the next layers here, we're going to add a little bit more shape to it. So see how I just balanced it out with those 3? The petals have a lot of depth. You see how you can really see down and into them. Okay, zap that with my cool air. I'm not cooling this completely because, again, warm to warm sticks better. I'm just solidifying it a little bit so it holds its shape really well. And you can keep going as much as you want. If you wanted to just make some little buds, you could stop here. If you wanted to just make centers that are really just starting to grow and bloom, you could just do the very first one. Maybe wrap it a little bit tighter, like it hasn't unfurled or it hasn't uncoiled, and then just add a calyx onto it, a really tight calyx. But I'm going to keep going with a couple more petals to show you how much they're going to change as we get bigger and the little bit of shape difference. Okay, but this is a very classic, like, long stem roses look as well, having the very smooth base and the very smooth petals in the middle. Okay. But still, when you look at from the top, They're all pretty much straight across the top. They don't vary a ton as far as being a lot higher or a lot lower than each other. And that will continue throughout the entire rose. Maybe the if you're doing a huge rose, the very outer petals might go down a little bit, you know, might open more, but for the most part, all of the center petals are all going to be flat across the top. Okay, so my Isomalt is getting a little hard, like I was saying, because I was taking it out from the lamp, so it's a good opportunity to show you guys how I reanimate it. So I'm going to move my rose here. Make sure you keep your roses away from the lamp. You don't want them to be near the lamp after they're all put together, because they will heat back up and slump. So make sure that they're just away from that light. I'm going to take my Isomalt that was under the lamp and just reanimate it a tiny bit. So I'm taking this in the microwave on the mat, folding the mat over. 5 seconds only. Because it's already warm, it's just not pliable enough. It'll take the heat really, really quickly. So you only want to do 5 seconds at a time. And then I'm just kind of pushing on the outside of the mat to feel when it's pliable. You kind of want to feel all over, because sometimes, again, the microwave will be a little bit uneven, so the outside will feel different than the center. Being careful when you take it out that there's no liquidy spots. So all I was doing was just kind of pushing down onto the outside. Move our rose because I already bumped it. And then you can see that some spots got back to really liquidy, so I'm just going to fold it and fold it. Make sure there's no liquid spots for me to stick my finger in before I were to pick it up. That's just a good way to reanimate. If you don't have a lamp, you can just keep doing this over and over. You may have to do it almost every petal if you don't have the lamp, because it does take a lot of time after you make the petal to put it all together before you come back to the pulled Isomalt, but that's okay. It'll work at any level, it just may take a little bit longer. There we go. So I'm just going to stretch and fold a couple times to balance the temperature back out. And there we go. Put that underneath my lamp. So it's back to the texture that I like by heating it up and then cooling it slightly with the pulling. Alright. So we're going to start adding some outer layers to our rose now. So let me grab the bigger one and show you. As they go out with a rose like this, of course there's so many varieties of roses and you can really tailor it to how you want it to look. But with this rose that I did, which is going to be kind of just a general aesthetic kind of Beauty and the Beast rose, you see how the center petals are a little bit smoother, but the outside ones are getting a little bit more pointed and a little bit more ruffled. So we're going to add that in, okay, with our next layer of petals around the outside. Okay, so I'm going to make a petal underneath my lamp just the same way I did before, so it'll only take a second. You can get slightly bigger as you go out if you want to, but I generally don't even get that much bigger because I don't want it to be too drastic. Alright, and what we're going to do is we are going to, if this is the top of the petal looking at us, what I'm going to do is kind of bend it backwards and pinch the very center a little bit. Okay, so see how I just put a little bit of like a pinch there? When I put this on, then I'm really going to start shaping it more. I'm going to lightly torch that because it got a little bit too hard. Give that a few seconds to sink in. And then I'm just going to start curling it like I did, kind of in like a triangular shape, so that when I'm curling them, you see how it's creating that triangle shape at that point that I just put in. And then I'm just adding a little bit more flair and movement to the sides of the petal as well, so it's not so perfectly flat. See that? So it's very subtle, but it's just some little tiny movement to it. So I'll show you again on another petal that I make. So I'm going to pinch outwards, forwards, outwards, keeping on the outside edge as we pull it to make sure it's not getting too uneven. Okay, I'm going to put a little pinch in the center and then just add a little bit of ruffled movement. Oh, I cracked that one, but that's okay. That's what happens when you go a little bit too long on it or that you didn't heat it before you started to put shape into them. So if that happens, either start working more underneath the lamp or just remember to lightly zap it with the torch before you put it together. The best part about Isomalt is that it's all going to be remeltable, so if you don't like a petal, you don't have to put it on, just throw it back in your bowl and remelt it. You don't want to put it back underneath the heat lamp because it's not going to remelt as even as the massive Isomalt that you have, so it'll end up just getting lumpy. Okay, So now I'm going to learn from that. It really depends on the day too, because some days are going to be more humid or more cool or warm than others. So I'm putting this next one on. I just added...
The rose is amazing.
Oh, thank you. I just added a little bit of movement with my fingers. Okay. And then started kind of curling it. Okay. So see how that's just more so reflecting the light than anything and making it look a little bit more flared. All right. And we're going to keep going. So you could make a rose with 100 petals if you wanted to, just getting bigger and bigger and more layers as you go, or you can keep it smaller. I'm going to finish this row around so it looks balanced. And then we'll move on to our other elements. Okay, so I always let that sit for 5 or 10 seconds, not only for the heat to sink in, but also you just blowtorched it. You don't want to put your hands on something you just blowtorched. Putting that on. A lot of times I like to shape it after it's on more so because it just gives me a little bit more of an idea of how it's going to look and where it needs to fit in. See that? Now as I'm going out, the outer ones, like I said, are getting a tiny bit lower, more so that they're flaring out, not even that they're like shorter or anything, they're just flaring out more. I usually do that with the outmost row of petals because if you flare out the center rows, you're not going to have any room to put more on top of them. So I keep the center ones pretty tight in, and then when I know I'm doing my last ones, that's when I go ahead and start flaring them out flatter, so it really gives the effect of looking more open.
Barbara said, especially in Florida.
Yeah, especially in Florida. You can never predict where that weather is going to be here. It's been almost 90, I think in the 90s this week, and then today we woke up and it's 75, so who knows. Alright, so I stuck it on. It's okay to heat once it's on there because the other petals ideally will be cooled, like from using the fan like I was before. Okay. So see how I'm just adding that little bit of like a ruffled movement to it. That one was a little warmer, so I'm going to cool it. And you can see now with the lighting down here how it is, how pretty that's looking as we're adding more and more petals. Okay. Just tweaking this a little bit. Alright. And we'll keep adding on a couple more petals here. I'm a big advocate for making the finished piece look good compared to following strictly with a pattern. So even though, let's say I have gone all the way around, if there's like an empty spot or an open spot on one side, I'll just put a petal there. I don't really mind that there's only one in the row on the outside or anything like that. I just really want to make sure that it's going to look balanced in the end. So I'm going to put one here, and I think I'm going to put one across from it for my final roses, or final petals, because I could see there was a little bit of an empty spot here. So far I have the 1, and then the next 3, so that's 4, and then I just added 5, so we have 9 petals on there. Again, I don't really follow a pattern, but if you wanted just for reference, that's how many, and I'm probably going to do 1 more. That's what we always say, right? 1 more petal, just 1 more petal. That's the only drawback to doing them freehand like this, is you can always use 1 more and then you end up working for an hour on it. Okay. That is another thing though that I like about Isomalt, is that it's really instant gratification. So you can see, I mean, we've been at this for about 20 minutes or so, and the rose is almost completely done. There's no drying time, there's no waiting for it to set up or anything like you have with gum paste. So that is one benefit. Depending on your climate, of course, it varies, but here in Florida it can take up to a week for fondant gum base to dry, if it does at all, and as soon as you go out in the humidity they can reanimate. So these are really nice because they are done. They're really good for last minute pieces and making pieces in advance too, because it's just instantly done. Okay. I know I said I was only doing 1 more, but guys, I'm going to do 1 more because I think it needs one right here on that side, because it's looking nice and round over here, but it's a little bit flatter on that side. Now if I was going to lay this down though, I may not want to. So kind of angle it the way that it's going to be facing to make sure. But I am going to add just one more. Now Isomalt, once it's stuck, it is stuck. With these, because they're only really going to be attached at the base, you could kind of break it off and then just cover up anything that's stuck on the bottom with another petal. But try to put everything where you want it the first time. If you need to hover it in front of it for a second instead of just attaching it on, definitely do that so that you make sure it's in the right spot, because it is hard to get these off once they're on. Alright, stretch this a little bit wider. There we go. Alright, so I am pretty happy with that rose. I'm going to cool that down. And there we go. This little petal that had cracked, I'm just going to throw that back in the bowl. That'll melt back down to a liquid once we put it in the microwave. And that will be good. Alright, so there is our finished rose. You can see it's about the same size as the one that I did, maybe a little bit bigger because I did the petals slightly bigger. That's going to be perfect for like a cake topper. But again, if you want bigger flowers, you can do it. You don't need any different cutters, no different templates. You just make them bigger, which is awesome about Isomalt since it is done all by hand. Of course, it takes a little bit of practice to get everything even and make sure you don't have any super thin spots. Alright, so here is our finished rose. I'm super happy with that. I think it looks so pretty. You definitely can see that this one gets a little bit more lost than this one. That's again because of the painting, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay. But before we go into making our stem and everything, I want to go ahead back to the frame because we want to pour the center and have that ready in time. Alright, so I'm going to take my frame here. Right, I can tell that this is definitely cool because it's been a while since we poured it, and I've done a lot of pieces, so I kind of know which mold is going to take how long. But make sure that you just test it with a toothpick or a tool because you don't want to accidentally stick your finger in if it's still liquid. But after I can confirm that it is completely solid, I'm just flexing the mold and releasing it out, and look how pretty that is. Let's see if I can get the light to catch on it. Again, once we paint, it's going to really, really bring out all of that fine detail. There we go. In the frame. If you have any rough edges from where you spread it in the mold, or maybe you overflowed a tiny bit, just put it face down and lightly torch around the back edges, and that will just smooth everything over. If you had a really big spill after that step of torching, you can let it sit for a few seconds and then trim it off with scissors. And what we're going to do is we are going to put an icing image on the inside of this. So I'm going to go ahead and use my design. Again, this came in the accessory kit that was for this project. Of course, you can print out your own design if you want to, but this is the one that I thought I'd do since it's almost Mother's Day. Alright, and I'm just going to put this on a little Teflon mat to be able to move it around, but you don't have to because it's going to be sitting on the design itself. Alright, and it's on a plastic backing. Okay, so this is just an icing sheet. This is from Icing Images. It's their regular icing sheets that have a plastic backing. This is not the Simi transfer sheets, but it definitely could be a Simi transfer sheet if you wanted more of a see-through effect. For this, I wanted a very white background so everything popped, so that's why we're using an icing sheet compared to the transfer sheets that are going to be more transparent. But all we're going to do is, leaving the plastic backing on, we're just going to set the frame face up right on top. Make sure that it's all centered. Alright. And then we're going to pour Isomalt over it. So I'm going to heat up my clear Isomalt until it comes to a boil. Now this time it's going to be more important that it does come to a boil because you want to make sure that it's going to be crystal clear, right? So all the air, any air pockets that it's in it, we want to bring that out. So I'm going to bring it to a nice boil, and then we'll go ahead and pour it in. Now we want to make a little wedge for this to stand on. You don't have to do this if it's just going to be sitting flat against like the side of a cake or the top of a cake or something, but if you want it to actually stand up like a picture frame, you can make a little wedge for the back. You can use a triangle shaped form or cutter like would be traditional for a picture frame. I just had this little square metal cutter at my disposal, so I'm just going to use this, and that will create the wedge that's going to sit up against the back. But you could use any shape really, as long as it has a base that's flat and then a back piece to sit up against the frame that's flat. So this one will work fine for me. This is a metal cutter though, so it's going to stick to the Isomalt unless we grease it. So I'm going to grab a paper towel here, and I'm just going to spray a little bit of cooking spray. It can be any kind of spray oil, as long as it's not a powder like baking spray that has the powder stuff mixed in. Just has to be a pure oil. And I'm just going to spray and wipe that in the inside of the form to make sure it releases. Okay. Check on my clear. Oh, there we go, it's almost there. And we'll pour that onto the Teflon mat so that it will release from the Teflon mat. The Teflon doesn't have to be greased or anything. You can also pour on a piece of aluminum foil if you don't have this non-stick Teflon mat. You can pour it on a piece of aluminum foil. Just make sure that you do grease that because that's metal as well, so it will stick. But you can also use non-stick foil. They have a specific type of foil that's non-stick, and that does not have to be greased. So you can pour Isomalt right on that and it will release beautifully as well. So you have lots of options depending on what you are doing, but I'm just going to pour mine right there to keep it all nice and easy. Grab my clear, perfect. So this is at a nice boil right now. So we're going to put that off to the side and let that cool down. So again, hotter it rises, all of that air is just going to be rising and bubbling out, and it's going to leave us with a really crystal clear look for the inside of our frame, since we want that to be nice and see-through to be able to read the design. Now, of course, you could do lots of different patterns in the middle. You could do somebody's name. You could even do their photo if that's what they wanted. You could do business logos. You can do just, messages like this, like Happy Mother's Day, Happy Birthday, maybe a baby shower. So you have lots of different options. And then, of course, the comparison of the icing sheets compared to the Simi transfer sheets where you get the transparent finish. I do leave it on the plastic backing until it's cool, and then I'll trim away the excess and peel the plastic off. But you could peel it away now if you wanted to. It won't really make a difference. I just like to leave it on the plastic so that if I don't have this mat under it, it's not going to stick to the counter or anything like that. So I just make sure I have something under it to support it, whether that's the plastic backing or the mat. Now, if you still have your red underneath your lamp, make sure you leave it there if you can, or you can pull it afterwards if you don't have the lamp. But we're actually going to be using that to create the vine on the back, and then we're just going to paint it. So I'll show you a really nice way to get an opaque painting finish on top of other colors. So I'm just waiting for that clear. It's almost there, so I'll show you. It is not boiling, but those few bubbles that are on the top are still kind of moving, and I can tell when I move it around that more of them rise up, especially around the outside. So that's a sign that we still want to let that cool down a little more. The icing sheets and the transfer sheets, you don't want to burn them, or you don't want to cause more bubbles or anything from pouring it too hot. So it's really important to get them nice and cool. Luckily, this is not really like a super detailed shape. It doesn't have a ton of movement to it. It's just an oval, so in a square. So it's not going to have to be super runny. So if you can let it cool even so that's a little bit more like a thick syrupy texture, that's even better because the design will like that. Alright, and like I said, these are icing images, icing sheets, so those are really thick and they're going to hold up really well. It's just their premium icing sheets, so it's not going to bleed the color or anything like that. Here we go. Alright, see that, how it's nice and crystal clear? I'm going to go ahead and just pour enough to cover the bottom of my form first. Don't need very much because Isomalt is strong. Okay, so I just poured enough to cover the bottom, and then I'm going to pour enough to cover the bottom of the design. Okay, you can use your tool or toothpick if you need to spread it into any crevices. It looks like I did pretty good with that, so I'm not going to have to spread it. I like to wait a minute or two and then torch away any surface bubbles that may rise to the top. But sometimes it takes them a second to get up there because Isomalt is such a thick texture. So this one I'll just lightly zap. You don't want to zap it too much with the torch because you don't want the black to remelt into the clear and bleed the edges. But as long as you just pour it after it has done, it's done boiling and it's settled, the other color should not blend into it. If you poured it too hot, it could blend into it, which could give you some cool effects too with marbleizing. But for this, I wanted very distinct differences between the black and the clear. So as long as you let the Isomalt settle, it shouldn't bleed together. There we go. Alright, I will go ahead and let that cool off to the side here. So I'm just going to slide it over. That's probably going to take about 15 minutes or so as well. So I'm just going to push it over here out of the way. Alright. Alright, so while that is cooling, we'll go back to our vine and our calyx and leaves and all of that fun stuff. You could also do thorns on there if you wanted to. How's everybody doing? Anybody got any questions? All good so far.
Everybody's quiet. today.
Everybody is quiet today. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to just use the red, like I said, for the stem and for the leaves. I am going to heat mine back up just slightly because it, again, got a little bit hard underneath my lamp. So I'm going to grab another mat here so I don't have to move anything. Okay. This reheating technique in the microwave only works if your Isomalt already has heat to it. So because this is pretty hot, it's just not pliable enough, it'll work. But I don't like to do this with Isomalt that hasn't been heated yet. So like the tiles straight out of the thing or you know, something from the bowl. I like to do it with Isomalt that already has heat because it'll heat a lot more evenly. If you do it with cold Isomalt, it's just going to heat unevenly. You could burn certain spots because it's not heating even enough. So it's best, since it doesn't have the insulation of the bowl, to just do it with already pre-warmed Isomalt. Alright, so that melted back down really well. So I'm carefully just pulling this so I don't bump any of my pieces here. Okay. Alright, so just folding, folding, folding again. You're just kind of starting from the pulling process of waiting for it to seem like it's not super sticky anymore, and then you'll re-pull it if it needs to be cooled off any more after that. Okay. All right. There we go. So now I'm just going to cut a piece off to make the stem first of all. Now you could just do this with green Isomalt if you wanted to skip the step of painting, that's totally fine, or whatever color you wanted to do. If you're doing more of an artistic look and wanted to do gold or something with like a pearl or white rose, that would be pretty. I'm just going to cut a piece off, and I'm going to start stretching it and rolling it into a tube. So normally you would just roll something out with your hands, but Isomalt's very finicky and very sensitive to touching and cooling, so I'm going to roll it once or twice every once in a while just to get finger dents out, but I'm mostly going to stretch it. So wherever it looks wider is where I'm stretching. I don't just want to pull from the ends because it'll automatically get uneven from wanting to pull thinner in the warmest spots, which is usually the middle. And then I just roll it to get any finger dents out. There we go. You could go as thin or thick as you want. I'm going to just cut this at a slight angle like a flower stem, but then use my scissors and my fingers to kind of mush it a little bit so it doesn't look too cut. Alright, and then I'm just going to kind of add a little bit of shape to it. Not a ton, because their stems are pretty rigid. But I just want to add some movement so it doesn't look fake. Okay, and then we're going to figure out what orientation our rose is going to sit on. We may even have to wedge it a little bit with some pulled Isomalt. So what I'm going to do to make it sit on its side and not be unbalanced is just take a tiny little piece of pulled Isomalt and use it kind of like a kickstand in the back. So I just put it down so that it's at the kind of orientation that I want it, and then just push the Isomalt in. Okay. Oh, broke a petal. That's okay. We didn't need that petal. Okay, it actually broke in the perfect spot, so I can just show you guys how to put it back on, because you won't even see it. Let me add a little bit more pulled Isomalt to bend it over.
Sydney, do you
Yes.
see Michelle's comment?
Yes, I do. Let me get this cool, and I will read it. There we go. Alright, I'm going to let that little pulled piece that I pushed back onto the back of it cool. Let me see. When you re-microwave your Isomalt that was previously pulled, will it take the air out? Basically, can you reuse it in a clear form? Yes, it will take some of the air out. You may actually have to bring it to a boil and then let it cool back down and then bring it to a boil again and repeat that, because if you try and bring it to a boil, like a really furious boil to get all of the air out, it could actually burn the Isomalt because you may have to boil it more than normal to get all the air out. So if you're going to be using pulled Isomalt and cast Isomalt, you want to make sure, like I try and keep two separate bowls. Like I have a bowl of clear that's pulled and clear that's for casting and pouring, and then I just use those for their respective uses. But you can take pulled Isomalt, especially if it hasn't had as much air pulled into it, and bring it back to clear. It's just a little bit harder because you may have to do it a few times. You just want to make sure you really let it cool back down before you reboil it, because you, again, don't want to burn it. So you can, but if you can keep two separate dishes, that's even better, because it'll give you the better chance of getting crystal clear. Okay, so this little piece of petal broke off because it must have had a thin spot or something where I pushed on it too hard, but you actually won't be able to tell where the seam is when you look at it, because it broke underneath the previous one. So I'm going to show you how to put it back together, because that is not the end of the world. You can pull a new petal if you wanted to and put it over it, but this one broke super cleanly. So I totally did that on purpose to show you guys how to fix it. And look at that. You can't even tell which one broke, right? Perfect. All right, so now going back to the center, I'm just going to put my stem on. So I'm just torching both, because warm sticks to warm, attaching it on at the back, just like that, and then we'll cover everything up with the calyx in a second. Okay. Leaves are super duper easy. What we're going to do is we're just going to pull a piece like we did for the petal, but instead of pulling it wide, we're really mostly just going to pull it towards us. You can pull it a little bit wider if you wanted a wider leaf, but we're going to pull, 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 and then cut at an angle, kind of like a flower stem. If you want to put a center vein up the center while it's warm, you can use the scissors or a small palette knife to imprint it. And there's your leaf. Easy as that. I like to give it some shape so it has some movement to it. Okay, and then you can let them cool and then attach them, or attach them on one by one like we did with the petals. So I'll do another one. Do a little bit smaller one for some variation. Immediately just using my finger to kind of wrap it around to give it some shape. And then let that cool. You can hold it in front of the fan for a second if you feel like they're really pliable and they're falling down and flattening against the mat. You can make thorns if you wanted to by just making tiny versions of the stem. But it's really important to imprint that center vein right away, or to reheat it a little bit with the torch like we were doing with the petals. Okay, teeny tiny little leaves. Alright, and then I'm going to make a few more so that I have enough for the calyx. Alright, now a calyx for a rose has 5 leaves on it, but it's, in my opinion, I want to make sure that you're really just making the ones that are going to be seen, because since they go all the way around, there may be some underneath the rose in real life, but I don't want to risk making my rose unstable by adding shapes underneath it and pieces underneath it that are cool, maybe not as solidified to the ground as I have the base right now. So you can put them all the way around if you really want to, but I'm really just going to put the ones that are going to be seen on top, because I don't want to make my rose unstable. Okay, and then all we're going to do for that is we're going to torch and stick. These are so lightweight you don't have to torch the stem if you don't want to, but you can. I'm just going to torch the base of the leaf, and I just stuck it on right underneath there. So I'll probably do at least 3 of these for the calyx. I like to try and put them all on pretty close together as far as time, because if they're all a little warm, I can tweak them and move them around if they're slightly pliable still. See that? So see how I only put the 3 on that I'm really going to see, so that I don't destabilize the underneath. But if you really wanted to, you can put them on while they're warm so that the whole piece kind of slumps down onto it and you get the color and the shape of them there without actually destabilizing the base. And then I'll add a couple onto the stem. When you,
Or if you're doing competition.
yeah, or if you're doing, of course, a competition where you want everything as botanically correct as possible. That's super important. It's all about, you know, what you're making it for and your personal style. Okay, I'll do a couple on the stem there as well. Maybe make one more just so that it's more balanced. Just a little one. Just a tiny bit. and it'll kind of, when you torch the base, I'm picking it up by the top so I don't touch where I just torched, but it almost makes it pliable enough to sort of wrap it around, the base around the stem. And there we go. Isn't that pretty? So those would be really pretty just vines around a cake if you wanted to do kind of like a Snow White sort of look. You can do lots of different uses for that in different colors. All right. So there is my finished rose. Of course, we need to paint the stem, so we're going to do that next, and I'll show you how I paint the petals a little bit too. Let me turn this lamp off so that I don't have anything warming my rose back up. Just going to unplug that. Perfect. All right, so we'll do a little bit of painting now. Let's see how our frame is almost cool. That's awesome. But we'll do our painting first on the rose. I'm just going to set a paper towel down so that I don't get paint on my mat. And that way you can see it a little bit better too. Alright, so I'm just going to grab my little paint palette here, and we're going to use some different colors for the different parts of the rose. What we'll do first is we'll paint the rose itself, so I'm just going to take a little bit of Super Pearl, so this is just luster dust, just pearl dust, and I'm just going to dry dust this onto the flower itself to give it a little bit of shimmer and a little bit of reflection. It's not actually adding anything to the color, it's just adding reflection into the whole piece, and that's going to make everything look a little bit sharper, and it will just make the details pop. It also adds a tiny bit of opacity to the whole piece, which is going to make it so that those details don't get lost on each other when they are transparent. So this is a really good thing to do with like brooches and stuff too, because it just makes it pop if you're not doing any additional painting on the brooches. So you can already see how much that's reflecting the light more than the stem is, and it's just kind of making everything really crisp. Okay, if you want to take it a step further, you can take a little bit of silver. You could do the pearl as well, but the silver is going to be a little bit more like muted so that it's not as intense. I'm using new silver. These are all from the Sugar Art. Okay, and I'm just going to put a drop or two of alcohol. This is vodka, or you can use Everclear. Grab like a flat brush. And I want it pretty watered down so that it's not going to be too intense of a color. And I'm just going to trace the edges of each of the petals very roughly and lightly. I don't want it too perfect because you don't want it to look outlined. You just want to add a tiny bit of pop to each of the petals. Now, of course, if you wanted this a more intense sort of look, more artistic, you could definitely add a darker color around it. Even I've edged these in like black before, and it's a very sort of gothic, like comic style because it's so contrasting. Makes it a little bit more spooky looking. Alright. If you want these super duper duper red, because adding in the air into it can sometimes take the intensity out, you can airbrush red on top of these or paint them red by hand with any kind of edible paints. You can use gel colors at this point if you want to. They just can't be mixed in. But you can use gel colors in dilution solution like we're going to in a second for the stem, if you wanted to add even more intensity. Alright, and you see how now it's popping even more, so that's good. We'll let that dry for a second while we paint the stem. Alright, and then I'm going to take a little bit of green gel color, so this is Leaf Green from Artisan Accents. Put that into a space on my palette. And then for the opacity, because gel colors are transparent, they are going to want to be more opaque so that it layers on top of the red, right? Because if you took clear red and clear green, put them on top of each other, you wouldn't really get that pretty of a color. It would be more like a brownish sort of color, which we're not going for today. So I'm going to mix in a little bit of the Snow White gel color into the green, which adds opacity. You could also add in a little bit of white petal dust if you wanted to add opacity, but this just mixes together really beautifully since they're both gel. And then I'll use a little bit of the dilution solution, which you guys know I love, to add some paintability to that so it's not too jelly. Stir that all up together. You can vary the color a little bit if you want, but I really like that just basic stark green in contrast with the red. It just is very classic looking. and I just go to town painting it all over. Of course, stylistically, you can add more shading onto these. You can airbrush this instead, like I said, or use powders mixed with alcohol. It's all up to you and what you like to do. The important part with this is going to be making sure that you pick it up once it's dried and paint the underneath of the leaves and things too, so that none of the red is peeking through. Alright. Being careful.
Yeah. She melted her icing sheet.
Oh no! If you had the accessory kit, there is an extra icing sheet in there just in case, but it just was a little bit too hot, probably the Isomalt when you poured it on over it. Just give it a little bit longer to cool next time. Alright, so I'm just doing this kind of quickly to show you guys how it's all going to look in the end. So you can already see, you can't tell that that was red anymore, right? Maybe the little spots that I missed that I would go back closely, and then when, of course, you flip it over, is going to add a more cohesive look to the whole thing. But that's really going to give you a realistic look, and it's nice because if you don't have any green Isomalt, or maybe you just want to save time and not have to pull a whole nother color, you can just make pieces in a base color. Ideally, of course, it's best to make it in a base color that's going to paint over nicely. You know, if you're doing like a red, just start with an orange or something like that. But if you really don't have the time, you can see how beautifully that painted over, and it really does look nice. And especially if you let it dry and add maybe another coat to give it even more of a solid finish, it just gives you a whole lot of options as far as what you want the piece to look like. So I'm just going to pick that up and show you up close. There's our finished rose. So I think it'd be really pretty to do a grouping of these, maybe do a bow around them, or to lay them out on something. You could put them in a vase if you wanted to. You know, I would do something a little bit shorter, or do them like a little arrangement. It would be really, really nice for Mother's Day just to have all of those different roses in there. You could do different colors, of course. If your mom had a favorite colored rose, like a yellow rose would be pretty, or even just some fun whimsical rainbow roses or something like that would be really, really nice. So just kind of one of those classic Isomalt, pulled Isomalt techniques. And then for the frame, move this guy over. The frame is totally cool now, so what we're going to do is I'm just going to peel the plastic backing away because it's easier to cut the paper when the plastic is gone. And then I'm just going to use my scissors. It's okay if it's not cut right up against where it sticks to the clear Isomalt, because the black is going to hide it even if there's some extra there. And then to make all the detail in the black frame pop, we're going to do the same thing that we did with the rose and paint a little bit of silver over it. So I'm going to take that silver, put a couple more drops of alcohol into it. Let's see, where's my silver brush? Let's get a little bit bigger silver brush here. And we're not going to kind of poke down at it with the paintbrush. We're going to go parallel to the table. So I'm doing it flat, sideways here, and only taking a little bit, and I'm just going to catch the detail, because I still want the black to be really bright and contrasting, but I want the high points to catch a little bit of silver. You can do this with white too for an even more contrasting look. Be really, really striking. And you see how that's making it pop a lot more than the sections that don't have it. So that's kind of my trick. You can go really in depth with this, of adding high tones, highlights and, you know, shadows, and lighter tones and darker tones. But just for a really basic paint job there that only took a few minutes, or a few seconds even, it'll just make everything pop really nicely. And once it dries, the alcohol can sometimes dry matte, but we're going to spray these with the clear edible glaze spray from for the Isomalt as well, so it's going to make it really, really bright and make it nice and shiny again. So see how that just caught all the detail. It also pulled it in with the rose, because the rose is painted as well, so you want everything to kind of look cohesive if you're going to be presenting these together. And then we also have our little kickstand here, so again, you don't have to do this step, but if you want it to stand up, I'm just going to pop this out. Sometimes things with corners like this like to hold on, so what we're going to do is just lightly torch the outside of the form. Remember, metal conducts heat, so wear your gloves for this, because you don't want to touch the metal after it's been blowtorched. I'm just going to pop that guy out. There we go. I'm going to torch the edges now just to burn off any excess oil. And then all we are going to do is flip this over. Okay, and you're just going to torch and stick this down on. Now you want to make sure that it's going to be level with the bottom of the piece, so if you want to do it standing up and just kind of set the piece to the back, that might be even better. And go on the longer side. set this up and just press it up against it. I'm going to make sure while this is still warm that it is straight. Let me torch a little bit more here. There we go. And there we go. So see how that just adds a little bit of a prop to the back. Doesn't really matter what it looks like because you're not going to see it from the front. And that way you can stand up your frame if you wanted to on your display piece. Okay. All right, so there is our finished frame with all of its painting and the icing sheet design. And then here is our finished rose. I'll show that to you again now that it's drying. So we have our beautiful petals, we have the smoother petals, we have the more ruffly petals, we have the painted calyx and the stem back here. I think that the stem just adds a really, really elegant look to it. It makes it, you know, clusters and bouquets of roses are really pretty, but I feel like this is a little bit more modern and it just adds like a sleekness to it, and I really, really like the finished effect with it. And I'll show you the one that we had in the picture too, just for a more comprehensive look at like paying attention to the painting and everything. You can see I went all the way around. And I even left a little bit of the red. I don't know if you could tell on camera, but a little bit of the red is showing through in some spots because I kind of like it. It adds like a sort of an artistic look to it, and it pulls the red in for the rose really pretty too. So and there we go. All right, turn my camera back up here. So what do you guys think? Can you see using these on display pieces, on cakes? Awesome. For those of you who are following along, how did it go? If you're going to follow along later, make sure to send me pictures. And even if you did it along with me, send me pictures, tag me in pictures. I would absolutely love to see all of your work. It's super fun to see your projects after demos and classes like this, to see what you guys made and see your own artistic interpretations of it. If you did it a different color, if you did a bunch of them, I would totally love to see that.
Beth says, 5th time starting my bed.
Oh no.
5th time's the charm.
5th time's the charm. It really does take practice. I mean, of course, I've made like 3 million of these in the past 14 years of doing this, so it does take practice, you know, just getting the feel for the Isomalt, how thick to do them, how thin to do them. Different colors are going to be different as well. The red does have a lot of color in it, so if you are having trouble with the texture, you can always try like a lighter color or a clear just to start out with, because it's not going to dry as fast. So just kind of play around with it and then you'll get a feel for it as you go. Awesome. Yay, I'm so glad you guys like it. Fantastic. All right, before I go, I wanted to show you guys some of my upcoming classes, because you know I always like to give you a preview of what my next Playdate is going to be. So if you had fun, if you want to watch again, my next Playdate for, what's next month? June. We're in May, right? For June, I can't even believe I'm saying that. Here, the Rocky Waterfall, Isomalt Waterfall is going to be mixed media, so we're using fondant as well, or you could use gum paste, as well as some Rice Krispies. We're going to be using Isomalt. I'm going to show you this hyper-realistic rock texture and edible moss, like a really slick moss. We're also going to be using pulled Isomalt to make the waterfall, because waterfalls are a really popular thing to do with Isomalt, so I thought I would show you how to do the ripples in the base and the textures of the pulled Isomalt in the waterfall, and how to combine the casting and pulling to put everything together. So that is going to be on June 4th at 2 p.m. EST, and the accessory kit is available for anybody who wants to use the molds and everything that I'm using, but yeah, the Rocky Isomalt is going to be June 4th. It's totally free here on my Facebook page, so you can check that out. I also have my next workshop. This is a not in person, but a face-to-face Zoom workshop. So on the Zoom workshop, we're going to be building this really, really pretty showpiece with blown Isomalt hummingbirds and flowers. It's really big. It's, I think, over probably just about around 2 feet tall, so it's a very big sculpture. So I'm going to show you, or talk about balance and showpieces and things like that. That one is a Zoom class again, so you can ask questions and be really hands-on with it, and that one's on Sunday, May 23rd, and then we have that online, so you can just come and hang out, or we have the accessory kit. And tomorrow I'm doing a really, really exciting project with Chef Nicholas Lodge on Cake Flix. So Cake Flix is doing another one of their amazing events. This one is going to be caking all around the USA. So it's 8 different instructors from all over the USA is going to be demonstrating different mediums, different projects, and I am lucky enough to be doing a back-to-back collaboration project with Chef Nicholas Lodge. As a lot of you guys know, that he was here a couple of weeks ago we were doing a collaboration, a couple different collaborations for the workshops and live streams and things like that, so make sure if you missed that to go back and watch. But while he was here, we also did this collaboration project of making a classic sort of vintage inspired Mother's Day project for my grandma Barbara. We surprised her with it. So he's making sugar gardenias, and then I did Isomalt perfume bottles and vases and a beautiful frame and string of pearls. So make sure that you tune in tomorrow because it's 8 hours. It starts at 9 a.m. EST. Nicholas is on at 9, I'm on at 10 right after, and there's 8 amazing artists, so watch all day. If you can't make it live tomorrow, you can definitely go back and watch the demonstrations because it's just a wealth of information and it's all free to watch on the CakeFlix Facebook page. So I'll make sure to share that, and of course he will as well, so I'm really excited for that too, and I'll be answering questions in the comments as well. So yeah, thank you guys so much. If you have any other questions, make sure to tag me in pictures. If you have any, make sure to if you do make these, you can also post in the Torch team. So the Torch team is our online Facebook group to share our love of Isomalt. So you can post that in the Torch team and also tag me. It's always fun to see each other's projects. So yeah, make sure to have a great weekend, everybody. Happy Mother's Day to all of the amazing mothers out there. If you have any questions, again, on the project, you're welcome to Facebook message me here, Instagram message, or email me. I'm always happy to answer questions. And all of my past and present playdates are online as well on my YouTube channel. So if you missed one or you want to go back and watch it, you'll be able to go back and watch this one. It's the past live that went on to my page, but you can definitely go back and watch it, or it'll be on my YouTube channel as well within the next few days. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for sticking with me, and I will see you guys next time. Keep life sweet.